So I'd like to introduce Ellen Voss tonight from the River Alliance. Ellen has been with the River Alliance since October of 2019. She brings over 20 years of aquatic conservation, fisheries, and science communication expertise to her role. Prior to becoming the River Alliance's Climate Resilience Director, Ellen worked extensively throughout the United States, Africa, and South America with various state agencies, private organizations, and most recently, UW-Madison Center for Limnology. Ellen has an MS in environmental science from the University of Idaho. And Ellen and her husband, Nick, live on a small farm in Gaze Mills. They spend their free time trying to tire out their pups, Loki and Odin, fly fishing, and paddling whenever the chance arises, and foraging for what's ever in season. So thanks so much for coming and speaking tonight, Ellen. This is the slide changer. We can flip this to Many apologies for the dim slides tonight. This is the latest we've ever done Conservation Tap in the year. Usually we're done by March, so I've asked Ellen to describe as much of what's on the slides out loud as possible because we realize that it's a little bit dim. Sorry about that.
No worries. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So, good to go. Awesome. Yeah, I will try to explain what's happening here, and I know it's really dark, but I thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I want to talk to you tonight about some kind of big concepts that I've been thinking about over the last 5 years or so, especially as they relate to climate resilience and how we can get ready for this climate future that we know is coming. And so just to describe what's happening on my intro slide here, there's some flooding conditions by my home in Soldiers Grove from 2018. This is drought, the other extreme climate reality on the Wisconsin River just back in 2023. And just talking about the intensity of storm events that we know are coming and are getting more frequent. So just to start out, I just want to talk for a second about River Alliance, who we are, what we do. If you've ever heard of River Alliance in the past, it's probably in the context of dam removal. We were started just about 30 years ago with this, I have at the bottom of the slide, it says, we really need so many dams. The idea back in the day was, paddlers started this organization. They wanted free-flowing rivers mainly for recreational benefits, but also river health and all the good things that come along with unimpounded rivers. And fast forward 30 years, we celebrated 30 years just last year. And we've shifted our focus from thinking just about rivers specifically to all water and how it's all connected and how we can advocate for clean water statewide. And so our mission right now is empowering people to protect and restore water. We're lucky in Wisconsin, we have a ton of water. I'm originally from South Dakota. It was eye-opening to me to move here just with how easy it is to get on water in Wisconsin. But with that abundance of water comes a lot of water problems, and so all across the state people are dealing with too much, not enough, contamination, and so we're a small but mighty force of just 7 staff members, and a lot of our work centers around this local watershed group support. So making sure that the people on the ground living in these communities, whatever your water issue is, you have the resources you need to advocate effectively and make your voice heard. So my role at River Alliance, just for the past couple years or so, I've become the Climate Resilience Director. And that's a term that means a lot and it means nothing. So I wanted to take a second and just unpack what we mean when we say climate resilience. It's sort of this umbrella term that it encompasses a lot of ideas and strategies with the goal in mind of being, how do we know climate change is real, we're seeing the impacts of it in our lives, and how do we become resilient? How do we bounce back when these climate events happen instead of having them destroy us and devastate our communities? And so a lot of generally speaking, climate resilience is this idea that we can prepare, respond, recover, and adapt to the changes, the changing climate that we know is coming. And for me specifically, a lot of the work that I do is this prepare section. Getting ready, thinking about strategies that work, that we know work, that we can use in preparing for the climate that's coming. So you can't give a climate change talk without talking about, without showing some graphs and talking about what's coming, what kind of weather patterns we're going to be expecting. So just this last week, I sat in on a webinar by the state climatologist, Steve Avris, and he was describing some of the results from the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, research that's been ongoing for more than a decade. And many of you probably already know this, but Wisconsin's going to get wetter, and we're going to get warmer. First of all, I just wanted to talk a second about showing the warming trend that we've been seeing. So again, I know that this is really hard to see, especially probably in the back. These maps of Wisconsin, way on the left here, this is showing the winter, spring, summer, and fall. And this is the change in the historical mean from 1950 to 2023. And so what we're seeing in every season across the board, we're getting warmer. But it's especially pronounced in the wintertime temperatures. Similar situation when we talk about how Wisconsin is getting wetter in every single season. This is slightly different. We're talking about the historical change in precipitation, but same story. I especially want to draw your attention to winter and to spring. Those are where the most pronounced changes are happening. The last decade has been the wettest on record in Wisconsin, and this trend is set to continue. We're especially worried about winter and spring for runoff concerns. So when you get those rain on snow events or melting events that happen, that's a huge potential for water contamination that goes along with those that warming and precip.
Is that so much an issue in the winter?
Yes, it's one of the, it's where we're seeing the biggest change is Wisconsin.
I mean the runoff. What's the runoff from in the winter?
Winter is getting warmer, and we're seeing increases in precip depending where you are in the state. It's either coming down as snow or rain, but with that additional warming, you get this input of potential surface water contamination. And my last thing I want to point out is that we are set to experience more intense storms. So climate change is supercharging the water cycle, and with that comes these intense storm events. And we're seeing this we've already seen this. This is a figure from Climate Central. It's showing the change of precipitation on the heaviest 1% of days. In the Great Lakes region, we've seen a 45% increase between 1958 and 2021. And this is my last scary climate change reality slide. Just to drive that point home just a little bit further. These two maps of Wisconsin, the one on the left shows the historical, it's kind of looking at these storm events that bring a lot of water all at one time. So on the left, you see these are days per 100 years where you get more than 4 inches of rain at one time. And those used to be relatively rare. So I live in Crawford County. We used to get those maybe 4 days every 100 years. But looking ahead at climate projections, what we're seeing is that those are going to become more frequent. And there's a lot of additional figures if you want to look this up on the Wiki website. I just looked at 4 inches, but there's also data for smaller amounts of rain as well. So again, tonight I want to talk to you about some kind of big picture thinking, all related to this issue or this idea of climate resilience. And the things I'm going to talk about, they might seem really disparate and not connected and random, but I promise that they all in some way have to do with climate resilience and things that we can do not just in the Driftless area, but statewide, that we can get ready for the climate reality that we know is coming. And so I'm going to start by talking about how we can build climate resilience by removing unsafe dams from the landscape. I'm then going to spend just a little bit of time talking about how the role of responsible hydropower relicensing can play in building climate resilience. Third, I'm going to talk about protecting biodiversity, especially in the context of pesticide use in Wisconsin. And in the last bit, I just want to talk about how big picture concepts of how thinking at the watershed scale has provides a lot of benefits and is the right scale to be working at when we think about the multitude of benefits that can come. So, like I said, I'm going to start by talking about how we can build climate resilience by removing unsafe dams. Again, this was sort of one of the founding ideas behind River Alliance, was this idea that there are a lot of dams on the landscape. Some of them aren't useful anymore, and you can build ecosystem resilience by restoring natural flows to rivers. It improves the water quality, and it also enhances habitats for things like migratory fish. In this picture, it's my husband holding a sturgeon. Certain fish, many of you know this, but migratory fish need different habitats throughout the course of their life to reproduce successfully. And dams are really famous for their ability to block migratory fish migrations. So when you get those aging, unsafe, maybe not useful dams off the landscape, it offers up this opportunity for a lot of really good ecosystem benefits. And I was looking on our website, there are so many before and after photos of what the situation was with the dam and what it looks like afterwards. And there's a lot of successes and long-term benefits that come from that action. But again, this is a climate change talk. So like I just said, we know that we're going to get wetter, we know we're going to get warmer, we know we're going to get more intense storms. So we have expanded our focus, thinking more beyond recreation and river health, and adding in this idea that of dam safety, community safety, dam liability, and flooding, which I know is central to a lot of, on the hearts and minds of a lot of people in this room. So I first moved to Wisconsin back in 2011. Like I said, I went to grad school in Idaho. I was used to thinking of dams on the landscape as these huge monolith, giant structures that block the movement of salmon. That is the famous story of dams and migratory fish. But when I moved to Wisconsin, it immediately became clear to me that things look a lot different here, but we have a lot of the same problems, they just look a little bit different. So I was working in the McIntyre lab at the Center for Limnology, where a lot of our work focused on aquatic connectivity and thinking about migratory fish and barriers to their migration. And one of the last projects in that lab that I got to work on was visiting 500 dams in the Lake Michigan basin. There are over 1,000 just in Lake Michigan. And I know this is supposed to be about the Driftless. I promise I'm getting back to that. But it provided this weird, it gave me this view of dams that I hadn't ever seen up close before. Just the sheer scale and seeing the impacts that they were having. I know this is hard to see, but every one of these blue dots on this map is a dam. And everything in red here, it looks almost like it's painted red, but those are blocked migrations for migratory fish associated with those structures. And what I found was that these dams are in all kinds of varying degrees of, some are in great shape, some are basically falling apart. But there's a lot of them, and they're having all kinds of environmental impacts. And just to drive that point home a little bit further, the dams that we have in Wisconsin, depending on which database you look at, we have over 4,000. So not just looking at the Lake Michigan Basin, but looking at statewide. And this report came out last year. Many of you maybe saw it. But we found that Wisconsin actually ranks second in the nation for dam failures. And a lot of those have happened in the last decade. the average age of dams in Wisconsin is 80. So this is a quote from that article. Uriah Monday is one of the state dam safety engineers. And just driving home this point, it's infrastructure and it ages. And as it ages, it becomes more unsafe. So many of the people in this room saw this firsthand. It's happening at all scales. From these flood control dams, these PL 566 dams. Many people probably lived through the 2018 floods where we saw 5 of these flood control dams fail in one storm event. This is hard to see, but it's showing, I think this is Jersey map.
Yeah, it looks like it.
And we have a lot of these dams, not just in Vernon County, La Crosse, Monroe, but we have a lot of these statewide, and there are over 11,000 of these in the entire country. So we have unique geology here that made these structures especially susceptible to the climate impacts that we're seeing, those extreme storms, those heavy flood events. But this is an issue that's we have to figure out. And I know it's easy to talk about dam removal in the abstract. It becomes a totally different beast when it's happening to you. I personally went through that 2018 flood as well. I had just moved to the Driftless area full time. We had found this rental house. You might recognize it. It's by Soldiers Grove. And we literally had just moved all of our collected belongings into this house. And that's the night that the storm happened. And so the next day, we came to check out what had happened. And literally our house was surrounded by the Kickapoo River. So this is the front yard. It's hard to tell, I know, in this light. This is the view from the back porch. Basically, it was riverfront property, literally right on the river. I'm talking about climate resilience in terms of habitats mostly, or ecosystems, but I know a lot of us are used to thinking about resilient people, and this is a picture of my husband, Nick, fishing for bass and bluegill in our basement. The basement was completely full of water after the river receded.
Did he catch any?
We got them all out of there, yes.
How many?
2 bass and 1 bluegill. Yeah. So we're able to save the day for those poor little fish. But yeah, it's a serious topic. I take it very personally because I lived through it too. But again, it's a reality of the times that we're living in. And so I just talked about, again, I just want to point out that these failures are happening at all scales. So anything from these small flood control dams to, I want to point to a couple examples of pretty much bigger dam failures that happened within the last year. So this one actually happened in Mankato, Minnesota. You might have heard about it at the end of June. The Rapidan Dam failed. And I pass by this river all the time. I'm from South Dakota. I pass by Mankato, and I'm very familiar with this area. And the sad thing about this particular failure is that they stopped. It was a very small hydro facility. They had stopped producing power back in 2019. They knew that the dam had to go away, but they didn't know what to do with the structure itself, and there was all this sediment behind the dam because it had been there for over 100 years. It was loaded with nutrients and pollutants, and they didn't know of a way to get rid of it, and it was too expensive. So fast forward to last summer, and this intense storm comes. It was a 500-year flood, and all of a sudden, all of those you don't get to make any of those decisions. In one night, 100 years worth of sediment moved out of the river, did who knows what kind of level of damage. And again, you don't get to make those decisions when you're reacting to the problem. Another very similar situation, literally 10 days later, a very similar sized dam, but this time up in Manawa, Wisconsin, also failed. And the scary thing about this particular failure was that there wasn't anything really wrong with this dam. It had been inspected fairly recently. There were no outstanding major structural issues that needed to be addressed, and yet, even then, pretty good dam, one bad storm, and suddenly you have failure. So what I want to leave you with as I leave this dam removal segment is that all it takes is one bad storm, but if we can think ahead and plan ahead and get rid of these dams on the landscape that are no longer serving the purpose that they were intended for, we can get ready for that. And there's all kinds of restoration opportunities that can go along with that so that we can make our communities and ecosystems more resilient to the climate future. So I'm going to shift gears now. I told you I was going to talk about 4 big themes. The second one I want to talk to you tonight about is responsible hydro. And this might seem like a stretch. I know I just talked about small dams, everything from small flood control dams. Now I'm going to go to the other end of the extreme and talk about hydro, these dams on the landscape that are producing power. And this is just a map of all of the hydro dams in the US. There are a lot of them. But we have a ton here in the Great Lakes region. And most of the time, those dams are, 90% of them at least, are they're regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And I say that because it's an opportunity during the FERC relicensing process. You, as a person or as a small watershed group, you have an ability to weigh in on things that you want to see go into the next license. So it's your kind of chance to advocate for things that matter to you. And why does hydropower matter? Hydropower has huge impacts on the environment, both from a water quality, water quantity considerations, but also again when we're talking about things like migratory fish, like sturgeon that need to access a bunch of different habitats during their lifetimes. These hydro dams, unless there's fish passage built into the facility, those are absolute barriers for migration. Hydropower also matters because it's going to continue to be a part of our energy transition. These dams do damage, but they're not going away anytime soon. And the average license for these structures is anywhere from 30 to 50 years. So I'm in my 40s, and just to put this in context, some of the license terms were developed before I was even born, and they're still going into effect. So someone back in the day had to think 50 years ahead about what conditions were going to exist and how to mitigate for those impacts, which is really hard to do. And so to put this all in context and try to prove why this matters and what the actual impacts are on the landscape, why should you care about hydropower, and how is this a climate solution? I want to tell you a story about a very real impact that happened on the Wisconsin River just back in 2023. So many of you in this room probably have spent time on the lower Wisconsin. By that river segment, it's everything below the last dam, Prairie du Sac, and onward to the Mississippi River. So my family and I are heavy users of that river. It's like this paradise of sandbars and great fishing, and it's a really effective way to wear my dogs out. They like to dig holes. But I always have to remind myself that the part of the river that I know best, this lower section that's a river and all these sandbars in this beautiful place, is also a super impacted system. There are over 20 hydropower dams on the Wisconsin River, starting all the way up in the northeast part of the state and ending, the last one is Prairie du Sac, like I said. And so just for context, this is an image taken from the Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company. It blew my mind when I found this photo. It's just such a weird way to think about a river. But when you're thinking about all of the different ways that water is used, it sort of makes sense. So you have all these reservoirs, all these dams, you're producing power, you're providing these recreation opportunities, and each one of these dams has its own license terms. So one dam on one river has an impact. Think about 20-some dams on one river and think about what the cumulative impact of that could be.
Are those reservoirs that are coming off it?
Yeah, in blue, you have the man-made reservoirs, and then the white are the natural lake reservoirs, is what they're calling them. And so, I opened this talk by talking about the climate future that we know is coming, so wetter, warmer, more intense storms. Back in the fall of 2023, we were experiencing the opposite end of the spectrum. We were in a very severe drought all across the state. And I really wish that you could see this image more clearly. But this is taken from the U.S. Drought Monitor, and it shows what Wisconsin looked like on September 19, 2023. And I joke, again, I live in Crawford County, so this dark red patch down here, it almost seems like they ran out of words to use for how bad the drought was getting, because they were left with, after extreme, they had to go to exceptional. And I don't know what they would have done if we ever got past that point. But the whole state was locked in this pretty intense drought situation. And on top of that, like I said, we had drought conditions, but we also have this cumulative impact of all of these hydro operations. And as a result of that, thousands, many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, we have no idea, of mussels were stranded on the lower Wisconsin River during that event. And I'm not even going to try to play this because it usually doesn't work, but there's a little news story that talks about that incident. So I need to take a minute to tell you about how amazing freshwater mussels are. I could talk at length for an entire hour just about mussels and how amazing they are, but for the sake of brevity, just for tonight, I'm just going to say that they're amazing. They're like the Clark Kents of the underwater realm. Unless they're doing all this amazing work in the river, but you'd never know it. They look plain and kind of unassuming. Their shells are kind of pretty, but beyond that, you won't probably give them a second look. But they're doing some amazing heavy lifting in our ecosystems, a la Superman. This is a picture, 2 aquarium tanks. One has mussels and the other doesn't. And I bet you can tell, if you didn't know this, mussels filter an immense amount of water. One mussel can do between 8 and 16 gallons of water a day. So they're valuable for this ecosystem service they provide, but they're also just, and again, I wish I had more time to talk about this, they are absolutely amazing creatures. They have this really complicated life cycle. But the part I want to show you is that to reproduce, they need a freshwater fish species. And the way they attract the right species to come check them out is by creating these lures on their bodies. So these mussels are literally fishing for fish. And the mechanisms that they developed to do this are completely amazing. You could waste a lot of time on the internet, and I encourage you to do that, because the videos are so good. But you'd never guess, and they don't have eyes, and they don't have a brain, but they've somehow figured out what they need to look like in order to attract the fish that they need to complete their life history. So again, back in fall of 2023, we're used to seeing the Wisconsin River being water with some sandbars. On September 20th, these drone footage images were taken by Randy Manning. This is right by Spring Green. And instead of a river of water, we have a river of sand. And there was little bits of trickles of water able to persist, but a very different landscape than what we're used to thinking about. And so I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the work we do centers around working with local groups, local group advocacy. And so this is a shout out to the Friends of the Lower Wisconsin Riverway. They're this amazing nonprofit organization that takes care of this river, the lower part of the river. So some of their members were out looking for historical artifacts on the river, and they happened to notice that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of dead mussels. What's going on? And so they put out this call to basically say, like, please let us know if you're interested in this. Please go out to the river. Please pick up individual mussels, and please toss them back in the water. And this was the strategy here, which is kind of crazy, but this is all we could do at the time. Was try to let people know that there was a problem and this kind of band-aid solution of how we could help. So when I saw this, I immediately, because I love mussels, they're so special. I called Tim Zum, who's pictured here on his boat, and this is Odin and this is Loki. They came with me, they helped. But he took me out on the river and we spent the whole afternoon literally just picking up mussels one by one and tossing them back into the water. And it was very easily the most impactful work event I've ever been at. It totally changed my view of hydropower and what the impacts are in a very real sense, what we stand to lose if we don't advocate for really effective effective license terms. And the really depressing thing that I figured out later, I was trying to document everything that I was seeing and uploading it later to, I don't know how many people in this room use iNaturalist. It's this amazing app that you can have on your phone that helps you identify some of the species and native things that you're seeing, not just native, invasive as well. But what I found was that some of the species that had the hardest time to finding water again, making their way to deeper water, were species that were already in a lot of trouble in Wisconsin. They were either state threatened or state endangered. And something like this could have been the thing that pushes them over the edge into extinction. So the end result of all this, many people went out, many people on their own went out and tried to help. Some told us what they were doing, some just went and reported back later, but the end result of this was that we're pretty sure this is going to happen again. How can we be ready next time? And so Friends of the Lower Wisconsin Riverway made this special page on their website dedicated to mussel rescue. So if you go right now to this website, you can sign up and you'll be alerted. In the event that we need to do this again, you will be alerted and shown what, or told what to do and how you can help. And I just want to say it again, this is an insane solution to this problem. Individuals shouldn't, this can't be the long-term solution, is asking individual people to go save mussels one by one. It works, we have to rely on it for now, but we have to think bigger about how we can be more effective and kind of, like I said, advocate for better regulation to prevent this from happening in the first place. And the reason I'm talking to you about this tonight is because I'm hoping that you care enough that you're going to want to get involved in this process. So this is yet another way to look at the Wisconsin River. These are all of the, shows the elevation as well, which is kind of cool. Every dam, all the way down to Prairie du Chien. Every dam on the Wisconsin River is going to go through relicensing in the next, starting in 2035 and finishing in 2041. And so this is the time, I know this seems like a long way off, but I promise it's not. This process takes at least 5 years under the best case scenario, with all the paperwork and everything that is involved. And so we have to learn what the issues are right now, so that when the time comes, we can point to these and say, these are the things that we need to make sure. We need to make sure there's minimum flow. We need to make sure that after all these competing demands for water are met on the river, there's still enough water for life to persist, so that things like freshwater mussels can survive. And so unfortunately, Prairie du Sac, this last dam down here, it's not going to go through relicensing until 2041. So we have to just keep doing this until 2041, if this happens again, individually putting mussels back one by one. But again, this is an opportunity to think bigger about how we can advocate for the reality that we would like to see. As I said earlier, these licenses last anywhere from 30 to 50 years. And so I kind of try to sell this as it's your once-in-a-lifetime chance to get involved in this process, to really ask for those improved conditions and try to mitigate some of these effects of hydropower. And I'm hoping that if you're interested in this, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. The challenge is that, again, we're supposed to be thinking about 50 years into the future. What is the climate going to look like? What are the conditions going to be? We don't know necessarily, but we have to make sure that there are precautions in place so that, again, mussels don't come in last. So, switching gears once again, my third big topic I want to talk to you about tonight is basically how we can protect biodiversity and how that is a climate solution. And biodiversity is basically our biggest insurance policy against anything that could potentially be waiting for us in our climate future. When we have genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity, we have all these precautions built into the system so that we can adapt and be ready for whatever awaits us. Biodiversity is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the background in ways that we don't even recognize, but we all take advantage of. So it's resulting in air and water purification. We rely on it for crop pollination. We get food security and we get economic benefits if everything in this, all these aspects of diversity are working well. But what's concerning, more bad news, sorry, a lot of what I say is super depressing, so I try to stay on the positive, but there's just some negative stuff that inherently goes along with this work. We've been seeing a global decline in biodiversity since 1970. This figure shows marine and terrestrial, but the really concerning thing for me is that this downward trend of biodiversity loss is in large part due to the freshwater biodiversity that we're losing. 85% since 1970 is alarming. And you might have seen this. To make this, again, relevant to the Driftless area, my husband and I, we spend a lot of our winter hours tying flies. And there used to be a reason to do that. You would try to tie flies that match the aquatic life stages of the invertebrates that lived in the river. So you're trying to tie caddisflies and mayflies and stoneflies, and doing this attempt at mimicry so that you can get the fish to bite. But what people are saying, anecdotally anyway, and it turns out there's evidence to back it up, is that we're not seeing the hatches that we used to on our driftless streams. We're not seeing the numbers of species that we used to see in the past, and the densities are way lower. And it's obviously not just happening in the aquatic realm, we're seeing it in the terrestrial, like I showed that figure, in the terrestrial realm as well. Some of you might know Mike Miller. He's the DNR stream biologist, ecologist. He always shows this photo when he talks about this topic. It's the grill of a Ford pickup truck. And not that many years ago, every time you went to fill up with gas, you would need to clean your windshield, right? There were so many bugs stuck on there that it was worth your time to take a minute and get rid of the bugs. We don't see that anymore. Definitely not the densities that we used to. And the bugs are disappearing at pretty alarming rates, so more than 75% decline in 27 years. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the big ones is the indiscriminate use of pesticides on the landscape. So one class of pesticides that I want to talk to you about tonight is this group called neonicotinoids, or neonics for short. Prior to 3 years ago, I had no idea what these were. It wasn't in my lexicon. I wasn't aware that they even existed. And now, the more I learn, the more I know. I see them everywhere, and they're very impactful. The reason they're such good insecticides is also one of the reasons why they're so dangerous. So they're systemic. They move in water. So the idea is that if they're in the soil or if they're on the plant, they're taken up by the plant, making every part of that plant toxic to pest predators. They also last a really long time in the environment, and they can be found in the nectar and the pollen of treated crops. And just for some context, most people maybe remember DDT, how dangerous and toxic it was. These are more toxic than DDT even. And what haunts me when I think about it is that they're really good at, so if you have a corn plant and all parts of it are toxic to pests, some of that pesticide ends up in the soil. And so even if you're a beneficial plant, like a milkweed, but you're growing in contaminated soil, this beneficial plant becomes toxic as well to anything that eats it. So you used to think of milkweed as being beneficial to monarchs, but in this case, if it is growing on contaminated soil, it becomes toxic to the bug. So where are these being used? By far, the biggest use of neonics is in agriculture. It's almost impossible to buy, unless you're fully organic, it's almost impossible to buy corn seed that's not pre-treated with this chemical. It makes it this weird pink color. Most of the corn is treated with it, and a good proportion of soybeans as well. But it's not just found in, that's the biggest use, but there's a lot of other uses as well. If you go to any garden store right now, and you pick up a product and you start reading the labels, you're going to see that it's found in a lot of things that you can just buy over the counter. Something that shocked me was that it's also found in a lot of pet products. So flea and tick prevention for dogs and cats. If you read the label, you'll see that imidacloprid, which is a neonic, is one of the major ingredients in a lot of cases. So the reason we're worried about these is that they're having really big impacts and they're not staying put. So they're applied as a seed treatment, just to use that example, but they're not staying on the seed. Because they're water soluble, they're moving in the water and they're ending up in the soil. And again, to bring this back to the climate future that we know is coming, we're going to get these intense storms. So especially when you're planting in the spring, you get these intense storms. A lot of that seed coating is going to wash off. And it's going to end up in your stream water and your groundwater. And there's data that is confirming that result. So these are a couple of slides that Mike Miller gave to me from some survey work that he did back in 2022. And again, I know this is hard to read, but in 72% of the sampling sites, neonics were detected in those samples. That's in stream and groundwater. And at really alarmingly high levels, especially in the central stands, were kind of off the charts, where samples that were at really high toxicity levels. And there's more research coming out, I feel like almost daily, about the non-target negative impacts of these chemicals. Everything from these iconic hex hatches that used to happen with frequency or regularity on the Mississippi River. We're seeing a 45% decline in these burrowing mayflies. We're seeing losses in bird life. We're seeing losses in pollinators, bees, butterflies. It's even having impacts on deer. They're finding that the jaws are getting deformed. It's leading to fawn mortality. And really worrisome, it's even showing up in humans. So they did this study, I think it was 2022, where 95% of the pregnant females that were tested had neonics in their blood. So it's wide-ranging, it's everywhere, and having all these unintended consequences. So again, to put this in perspective of why this matters, and I just want to point to the impact this was probably having on biodiversity, again, which is our insurance policy against a changing climate that we know is coming. I ran across this quote recently by Aldo Leopold in the Sand County Almanac: "To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering." And when I read that, it immediately made me think of this in the context of we're messing with the system and we don't even know what we're doing. We're taking out parts that are probably really important and interconnected, but we don't even know what they do, and it's probably going to have a really bad negative effect in the long run. So it's, there's a lot of social science that says you can't present a bunch of really terrible information to people and then leave them there. So I want to leave you with some hopeful actions that you can take so you're not just depressed after I leave you here. But as a consumer, you have a lot of power, and the idea is that if consumer preferences can drive market shifts. So just be aware of what you're buying, look at the labels, and if you can, if this is an issue that matters to you, try to avoid these products. And as a rule, I usually tell people don't bother learning these complicated chemical names of things, but in this particular case, a lot of things aren't labeled neonic. So maybe make yourself familiar with these three: clothianidin, imidacloprid, and thiamethoxam are the three big ones that you're going to see most often on the products that you buy. But again, sort of like hydro, saving mussels one at a time is one solution, but to get at the big picture, we have to think a little bigger about reform. And I just want to point to some successful examples, both internationally and nationally. There have been really successful campaigns to try to limit the use of these chemicals on the landscape. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but closer to home, there are either limits or restrictions or full-out bans, with this idea that we're having all these unintended consequences. This is one way that we can get ahead of the problem, and there's really a template for how we could potentially go forward. And if you're so inclined, I highly encourage you to join our very newly formed Wisconsin Neonicotinoid Work Group. This is an effort that grew out of the first ever Wisconsin Neonic Forum, happened last October in Madison, where we brought experts from all over the country and UW-Madison together to basically give us the current state of neonic use and impacts. And I think it was pretty eye-opening for everybody involved, but we wanted to keep the momentum going. So this is a way that the goal of this group right now is just to educate people. We want neonics to become as familiar as terms like DDT and PFAS, and just let it become part of the lexicon so people know that this is something that is an issue and that there's something that they can do about it. So that's where we're starting, with the hope this in time will turn into something bigger. But for now, we just want to build some advocacy around this issue to protect biodiversity. The last thing I want to talk to you about tonight, in my last couple of minutes, I don't want to go too late here.
You're fine, Ellen.
Okay. I want to talk about how this concept of thinking like a watershed, like this is the scale where we can be most effective in terms of climate resilience on the landscape. And this is an image that many of you have probably seen before. This is from Valley Stewardship Network. I would say, generally speaking, the watershed scale is easy for people in this area to envision. The topography makes it very clear how, when a drop of water hits the land, how it affects you, how it affects your neighbors, because you see it. You see it impacted in the storm events that happen. But that's a tough concept for a lot of people, and something that we're realizing over and over again is that a lot of people don't know they even live in a watershed. They don't understand how what they do is impacted and impacts the people who live around them. So one of the biggest solutions that we can do is to try to think at this scale and work at this scale.